Today we're extremely excited to welcome Diego Gigliani, the president and GM of St. Louis City SC in their beautiful HQ here in St. Louis. Diego, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. It's nice to be here.
Well, it's wonderful to have you. This is going to be a fun conversation. We have a load of topics to get through, but I want to start going back to the beginning, Diego. So we've done our research. You've done a lot of traveling in your early life and, being born in Argentina and getting that, probably that fever of that Argentinian soccer and what a team they've been over the last couple of years especially. But for you, is there anything that comes to mind, Diego, that might have steered you or given maybe a little bit of an inkling towards soccer or towards sport in your early life?
I mean, my love for the sport started in Argentina. When I was 10 years old, Argentina won the World Cup, 1986. I was living in Buenos Aires at the time, and I remember that moment really, really vividly as one of those core memories. In Inside Out, the movie, where those things stick with you. It was one of those core memories. I was 10, and we went out to celebrate in the street. It was the time, obviously, when Diego Maradona was the captain of the team and the best player at the time, one of still the best players in history. And it really marked me as a fan. I started following soccer a lot more. Diego Maradona was my hero for many, many years. I was a Boca Juniors fan. He had also played at Boca Juniors. And that was the beginning of my love for the sport as a fan. I never would have thought that from that I would end up working in sport, and especially in soccer. But I'm fortunate to be able to be here and say that I've been able to find a way to marry what I love with what I do.
Yeah, I've got a true false you one more time before we go into Justin's question. But Diego, we did our research again, and I saw. Were you the valedictorian at BU when you went to Boston University?
Yeah, I was.
Oh my word. Okay, impressive. So you may not have known or had the inkling yet for working in sport, but you worked your tail off clearly and made yourself available for whatever opportunities came about. I think that's the safe assumption here. But obviously Wharton School at Penn. I mean, the resume goes on and on. But obviously, being a fan of this club and the direction it's headed, I feel really confident you're getting someone that's cut their teeth, comes from a consulting background. I do as well. So I'm sure we'll get into that here in the conversation. But Justin, you want to kind of get us into the next question we have?
Yeah, so I think you touched on it there, Jake, on the history of what you've kind of done growing up in Argentina and then going to school. You've now been, and you mentioned on the interview with Pete Wood not too long ago, that you've been in the business and doing what you love for the last 12 years or so. Can you walk us through, you've kind of been all over, I know, from Man City and all parts of Europe and then over to St. Louis. What was the transition ultimately from and walking us through what you've done in the sport and your career in soccer?
Sure. So I joined Man City in 2013 at a really special time in the development of that club. The current CEO had just joined 3 or 4 months before I joined. His background had also been in consulting many years before, but then had worked at Football Club Barcelona, had been CFO and CEO there. And he was hired there with this grand vision that he had to not just make Man City one of the best football clubs on the planet, but also create this innovative structure of multi-club ownership, which now is a bit of a trend, and you can see maybe 30 multi-club organizations around the world. But that was very much his vision, and ownership backed him and hired him for that vision. And then he started making the changes he needed to make those things reality. And as he was doing those, I happened to meet him, and that created a little bit of this serendipitous moment where he was looking to not just hire more people, because Man City was still, in many ways, still run as a medium-sized regional club at the time, but also expanding by acquiring or creating new football teams. So at that point, I was in the right place at the right time. And I was able to take what I knew from consulting to apply it to, at that time, just Man City. So he was trying to figure out how to structure the different business units. And there was one business unit that didn't really require prior knowledge in sports. That business unit was called Media, Marketing, and Fan Relationship Management, which is basically like a way of saying all those things that a medium or small-sized team don't really have any capabilities in. Then why should you be thinking about marketing? You just got to sell tickets or sell shirts, or sell sponsorships, which are the kind of the core bread and butter of most professional teams. And those are more like the things that if you want to be a global brand and you want to really start connecting with more fans around the world, you need to start thinking of yourself in that way. And rather than finding someone that knows about that space in sports, his view was, let's take someone that knows about that space in other industries that are a lot more advanced in those areas. I had done in consulting a lot of work when it came to marketing strategy, CRM work, digital, and that was the areas that he entrusted me to lead. So I did that for 5 years. During those 5 years, Man City invested in the franchise in New York City FC, and bought a team in Australia. So my remit became Man City primarily, but also those same functions across NYCFC and Melbourne. I did that for 5 years, loved it, amazing group of very creative people that I got to work with. Worked with rights holders around the world. My last year, we did the Amazon All or Nothing series that Man City produced before some of the other Premier League teams, which was amazing and super rewarding. And then I was looking to see what was next. And at that time, we were continuing to expand the number of clubs that we owned. So, at that fork in the road, I either could have stayed and continued along the media side and gone to a media organization, work at Sky or worked at NBC or worked at Amazon or Facebook at the time, or I needed to go see other areas of sports. And that was the opportunity to say, all right, so why don't I go to more of a general management role, but in a smaller team. At that point, we were buying a team in Spain and in Uruguay. I lived in Spain. My mother's from Uruguay. I obviously speak the language. They were second division teams at the time. So our CEO said, well, why don't you take control of these teams? So finalize the acquisition, come up with a strategy, integrate those teams and operate them. And as we grow more number of teams, we'll start adding more under your group. And that's what happened. I started with 2 clubs, and by the end of the 5 years of my second role, I was overseeing 8 clubs around the world, including in some really big markets, France, Brazil, Italy, Belgium, Japan, and managing those clubs from Manchester with a lot of trips over there, but basically taking over the integration of those teams and making them work towards the goals that we were looking for.
City Football Group is incredible to watch, and the growth that you were definitely a part of in that time. And I want to kind of ask, because you mentioned, how many clubs was it now? Maybe now versus when you left, how many is it now? Do you know by chance?
Yeah, the group has 13 clubs.
13 clubs. How do you, Diego, in that role, step in and out of, because some of those clubs are your Man Cities, and some of them are your New York Cities, and some of them are like Uruguay or Japan. How do you, take a step into and out of these large and these small clubs and kind of tailor your whatever you can lean into to make a difference?
Yeah, I think that comes down to really understanding each of those clubs well and being able to adapt to the different expectations, resources, even strategies of some of those teams, because they're not all the same. I'd be in an organization, in a club that is in the, say, $70 to $100 million revenue range, excluding Man City, but the next level down, and clubs that were making $1 million a year, right? And players that were earning, some of them were earning $20,000 a year, and others were earning $1.5 million a year. And that obviously comes with a lot of expectations, a lot of implications with regards to the sort of opportunities for revenue growth, for opportunities to invest in infrastructure. And you just have to understand each club well and understand the realities, make it clear what the goal of that club is, because they're not all built to be $100 million clubs. Even very different projected kind of sources of revenue and value creation for the group. Right. So once you understand that and you can adapt and you're familiar with just reading the organizations that you're working with, you can do that pretty well.
Just with that much experience and then coming over here to City, could you simplify as much as you can your role that you do for City and fans? I think, and being the president and GM, I think it's a very obviously large title. What is more of like a day-to-day or what you do holistically for the group?
Yeah, my role is essentially to run the club end to end on behalf of the owners and in the direction of what the ownership wants for this club. So of course, Carolyn is our CEO. She comes to the office every day. She's very close to the operation of the club, but she and the rest of the ownership group were looking for someone that could help with more football club management experience. I had obviously done that across these 8 clubs a lot, with a little bit more degree of separation than I do here, obviously. But the problems that we're facing here, or the opportunities that we're facing here, are very familiar to me from the work that I'd done before. And I think that's what they were looking for, someone that had already that experience that could help them essentially run the club for them. I would also say that while I have end-to-end responsibility over business and sporting, the way that I was taught to work with sporting is very much in a way that recognizes expertise in sporting and value added from people that aren't like me, that didn't come from a non-sporting background, but rather the people that were either players or coaches or scouts. I was trained to believe in the expertise that those people bring and to delegate technical decisions to those people. And not just taught that, but actually learned that that is probably a really important success criteria of a club over the long term. What often one finds is clubs are run by either owners or CEOs that don't come from the sporting side, but feel that they know sporting just as well as anyone because they love the sport and they watch it a lot, right? And I do love the sport, I watch it a lot, but it's very different to have that conversation amongst friends or amongst family than it is with people that actually have played, have coached, and I love trusting in their view above my view when it comes to sporting and technical.
Yeah, that's us. We're the guys that love the sport. We watch it a lot. That's why we're on ball watching. But we are definitely nowhere near fit to be able to run a club.
But we acknowledge that, right? And you acknowledge that, and you surround yourself with people that can bridge that gap or bring that new perspective. Because I love you coming into Man City and bringing that. I love the game, but I've never worked in the game, but I'm going to bring a fresh perspective. And I wrote down a quote that I pulled from the City Voices podcast that you said, helping transition Man City into more of a global entertainment organization. And that stuck out to me as, we see Man City as this sport powerhouse, but there's so much underneath the surface. I'm almost picturing like an iceberg. And I know there's the same thing here. So Diego, when you come over to St. Louis, first of all, you're leaving City and City Football Group after a treble, which that's a great way to go out on top. I mean, unbelievable. And I'm not even a Man City fan, but that's a hell of a time to go out.
It was.
And then you come here. Was there any part of you, Diego, that was excited about the opportunity to kind of sink your teeth into one thing? Because I know you're spread across City Football Group, looking at all the different clubs and having a hand in each when needed, and maybe more so sometimes than others. But was that an element of something that was attractive to you to say, you know what, I'm just going to really get in there and I'm going to sink my teeth into this?
For sure. It was a really big driver. I mean, I loved working with multiple clubs because of the variety that gave you and the opportunity to find best practices in one club and help make an impact on the other club. But it was one step removed. My relationship was with the CEOs and the sporting directors of those clubs, and not in the day-to-day, showing up at the office where you've got your 50, 100, 150 members of staff that you're seeing every day. And I am the sort of person that enjoys that sort of environment. Also, you don't have the level of external conversations with media, with fans that I did in the previous role, where it was much more behind the scenes and helping to decide things and to put strategies in place, but then the execution on the ground was left to those operators. No? And I like the operation part of it also, and being close to fans and staff and what I get to do here.
Love it.
I would say for that one part. So when you were with Man City, obviously, like Jake said, you were touching all these different clubs. And before coming to St. Louis, I'm sure you had a couple of different clubs that were like, hey, we would like for you to just come here and be the president and GM. What stood out to you for St. Louis that was like, hey, this is a calling and something I'm very interested in? And was there some kind of, rumors on the streets that, did you possibly go to SLU Madrid at one point as well?
I did, yeah.
You did?
I went to SLU Madrid as well. So we have that in common. We both went to St. Louis University, but I studied abroad in Madrid for 6 months. And what an experience. I think if you want to go grow your love for the game, I mean, that's a place to go. It's fantastic. But we heard from an inside source that that's a place that you might have hit at some point.
Yeah, incredible coincidence. Incredible coincidence. I graduated from high school in Spain. I had left the U.S. 2 years before that. I always thought of coming to the U.S. to do college. But when you're 18 in Spain, you don't really want to leave. Right. It's a great moment to be 18 in Spain. Yes. So I was like, well, maybe I can postpone going to a U.S. college for another couple of years. How do I pull that off? And then I found out St. Louis University had a Madrid campus. So I applied, got in, spent my first 2 years there. Had always had my sight on going back to East Coast and as close to Boston as possible, because I had lived there 8 years in my life, had a lot of friends in that area. So then I transferred out of SLU and I went to Boston University. But yeah, St. Louis University was the beginning of my college years, and I never would have guessed I would have ended up living in St. Louis.
Yeah, just like a mile away from the campus now.
I'm going to go ahead and say that he probably took harder classes than you did when he was only over there for 6 months. So you coming over being the valedictorian of BU, you were taking like salsa dancing classes over there, weren't you?
I was taking Spanish art history.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Americans that would come for 6 months, the classwork was secondary to all the other experience. But that's okay, you know. They didn't live in
the experience.
Europe. Yeah.
I was getting pictures of this guy just doing like $2 Taco Tuesdays with a beer and seeing how many they could finish in one sitting.
It's a different culture out there, but it was amazing. And you get a little bit of a taste. I wouldn't say that's the St. Louis type experience, but coming here to St. Louis, were there any other drivers? We talked about that one club I can sink my teeth into. What else kind of stood out to you as part of this project?
Yeah, I always talk about 3 things that really made a difference to me choosing to come. The first was the club, and what was interesting about the club, that it was a new club. The ownership family was critical in convincing me to come and feeling it was the right place. The fact that they are super successful, both families, of course the Taylor family as the majority owner, but also Jim Kavanaugh and his partners, incredibly successful in their own right, from St. Louis. So they care a lot and in it for the right reasons. I remember speaking to them and them saying, we created this club not because we're crazy soccer fans, but because we love St. Louis, which is a really kind of purpose-driven club. Yeah. So I love the fact that it was new, great ownership. I came here and I saw the stadium. That was an incredible, tangible proof of intent and standards. When you walk around there, even before games had been played, you could sense that this was done with a lot of investment and a lot of love. And those things matter also for the long-term success of a football club, of a soccer club. So that was a lot of things about the club. And that was even before the season started, right? So I accepted to come here, and then the team started winning and winning and winning and winning. And I was like, oh, wow, amazing. And I'm going to arrive, and it's going to be first in the West, even better. The second main reason, I think, had to do with the market and the timing. So the U.S., largest sports market in the world, soccer still not a top 3 sport, but with continued, is it headwinds or tailwinds?
Tailwinds, yes.
I always get those wrong. Continued tailwinds to grow with Copa America, Club World Cup, probably Messi coming. All those things felt like a good time for soccer in the U.S. and for an MLS team.
Yeah.
That was the second one. And then the third point was just the personal side of a move like that. Obviously, you're picking up and you're taking your 2 young kids, your wife. She has to stop working when we come over here because of my visa. Those are big decisions. You're far away from any family. We had 2 very young kids then, 6 and 4 years old. And I knew it was a very easy opportunity for them to adapt. They had been studying in English anyway. But you still want to make sure that it's the right move for the family. And didn't know a lot about St. Louis before embarking in this process, but the more that we learned about it, the more that we heard that this was an amazing place to live with families, especially young families. And that's definitely what we've seen having lived here. The other part that I love telling everyone about outside of St. Louis is you can tell a city is good quality of life and people like it when you keep on running into people that came back.
Yeah, that's true.
How many people that I met that either both parents are from here or one is and they drag the other spouse over here because it's such a good quality of life. That speaks really, really well of the city, much more than a Google search will.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. And I think the personal side of it is something that people forget in a sporting side. We were talking about this the other day on the interview or on the podcast was we had Leuven last year and obviously had personal struggles last year with his family and getting an understanding of that and making sure that everybody on the outside world, not just in the team, understands that these guys are humans, that they need to make sure that they are taking care of themselves personally first, and then they'll go and do their job on the field. So I thought that was a great point by you. And kind of moving us into the team more specifically, you mentioned that pretty easy to come over once we're winning and winning and winning. Then last season, a little bit of a downturn. Now we're on the backups. We're starting season 3 here. So what are you looking for in this team and this club to evolve going forward in season 3 and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, at first, whenever I think about goals, I always start with long-term goals and then start dragging it back to midterm or short-term goals or annual goals. Long-term goals for this club has always been really clear. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's about St. Louis more than it is about soccer. So we use words like we want to be the spirit of a new St. Louis, or we want to be bigger than soccer. because we want everyone to remember that the overall goal of this club is not to just win trophies or sell out tickets. The role of this club needs to transcend the club and have an impact on the area that you see behind you, the people that are here, the companies that want to reestablish or grow their presence here. That is the ultimate goal. We are a means towards that ultimate goal. So, community long-term focus is a really important goal. Now we know that we can only, or a big way that can help for that to work is by also being an exceptional club. If we are an exceptional club that is filling out that stadium, that is helping other businesses around here realize that it's an opportunity to invest here, that we are winning trophies and therefore putting a spotlight on what's happening in St. Louis. How is this city in the Midwest competing with clubs in major cities around the US and maybe one day even internationally against Liga MX teams or other. That will help strengthen the reputation of the city, and with that comes a whole bunch of goodwill and positivity that comes after that. So those are the long-term goals: community goals, fan goals, and sporting goals. If I then drag those back and think, yearly, what do we want to achieve? And I'll do it on the inverse order of those. Sporting goals, we want to qualify for playoffs. That is really what we want to do every year. We want to go into every year thinking that we're going to be a playoff contender and a playoff qualifier. And then once we're in the playoffs, it really depends a lot on dynamic of the last 8 to 10 games. How have you arrived at the playoffs? How are your players fit? Mentally, how are you? We all know this is a very even league, so small differences can help you then have a good playoff and hopefully win titles. So that's our goal this year, qualify for playoffs. I would also add a second goal on the sporting side, which has to do with Open Cup. It's the only other competition that we're in this year, and we know how important it is to people in St. Louis. Last year, we saw, unfortunately, with a little bit of fan reaction to the fact that we weren't allowed to compete in Open Cup.
Yeah. That's a safe word to say there, reaction. That's
reaction.
That's good.
Reaction, yeah. I would emphasize they weren't allowed to also. We wanted to.
We understand, yeah.
But this year we are in it, and we also have the first game at home in the round of 32s. And we want to go into this with more determination to win it than we would in a normal year, the US Open Cup, where you've got another competition. Usually you're playing a Leagues Cup, and then you've got to figure out how do you manage your squad across so many matches. Here we know this is our only other chance for silverware. And we also come on the back of a year where fans made it really known to everyone how much St. Louis cares about this competition. So we want to go in, we want to win that round of 32s. We need our fans to be able to do that. We need a full stadium cheering us on. And then we'd like to win the next match, get into quarterfinals. By then you're in the top 8 teams, and hopefully
anything can happen.
Anything can happen. Single games, and hopefully we can bring a strong cup run here to St. Louis.
That would be a dream, just especially considering the deeply rooted competition here specifically in St. Louis. I want to talk a little bit about Diego. I feel like when I think about City, it's this whole club type philosophy. It's very end to end. It's not just what you see in the field. So much of it is off the field. And I want to talk about the kids. We pulled into here for the interview and we saw the City Futures van, and we know how much is being done for the community, especially for the young ones, and creating bigger, better fans and giving kids access to play maybe at an earlier age with club resources. Talk about City's kind of approach to creating a pipeline or getting more ingrained in the thoughts of young minds, and making sure that this is a thought, this is an option for them, not just for entertainment but also for play and purpose to come up in this game.
Yeah. I mean, I think we have a lot of initiatives directed towards our young fans or young players in this region. I'll start with the players part. You mentioned obviously City Futures. That was a really important sort of piece of the puzzle that was laid down pretty soon here. Where the thinking was very much around, one of the obstacles that the U.S. has to developing top quality soccer players is access to playing the sport, low cost access to playing the sport. When you go to places like Brazil or Argentina, cost is not an issue to play. They just need something that resembles a ball, doesn't even have to be a ball, and a big enough street where they can kick it around. And some of the best players in the history of the sport were created in those sorts of environments. Here, it feels like you need to be paying, and in a sort of a mid to upper income families that can afford for the kid to have that level of training. So here, again, going back to this desire of being very community-led, ownership family sat down with Lutz early on, and Carolyn feels really passionately about this, and they said, we want to create a program of soccer for all. And this idea of City Futures was created, where we go out to 5 different locations around St. Louis, try to target them around areas where there are people that may not be able to have access to soccer otherwise, and some of them are the first time that they're playing the sport ever. And we've got our coaches, we coach them, and we make sure that they can implement our methodology around those players, and hopefully we'll get some to at least love the sport to play, even if they don't become professional players. Mm-hmm. So that pillar is really, really important for us. And then we do a lot of youth when it comes to fan engagement. And I think that there's a lot that we do, of course, with the first team, with our merchandise and shirts being worn all over the city. But I would put a bit more emphasis on our City 2 offering. Hopefully you guys have been to a City 2 game or not?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun, and it's such a great complement to our first team experience. We love that it's at Energizer Park. Fans love going there to check it out. Sometimes it's just hard to get tickets to the first team, or they're expensive. Yeah. And the time of matches is very purposefully earlier. We work a lot with the MLS and saying, hey, no, we're offering this as a family experience. We want a lot of kids to come. These are $10, $12 tickets at 5 or 6 p.m. Typically on a Sunday, rather than 7:30 p.m. Tickets that are
after nap
$50,
time,
$100.
before bedtime.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yep, that's it.
And we've just completely transformed that experience, thinking of families and kids. So from pricing, food and beverage, even experience elements like a supporter camp for kids, and kids PA announcers, and obviously there are not as young kids, but we are looking at kids. The future of hopefully our first team comes from that City 2 team. They're usually 17 to 20-year-olds rather than 8 to 10-year-olds in the fan, but it's still a nice connection to have.
Yeah, you got to start that pipeline. I mean, right out here right now is the academy team training, and just seeing these guys, once you have them start kind of seeing the feel, walking in the locker room, seeing the first team guys, it's already that, wow, I can feel that, I can see it. And I think we talked to Tim Kelly, a friend of ours as well, kind of mentioned, as you progress, the academy trains here, City 2 trains here, first team here, you get closer and closer to get to the stadium, and it just makes so much more sense in that sense. So we do appreciate what you've already done for that. And then I also wanted to transition us into when you were first hired. Carolyn said Diego brings an incredible amount of international soccer expertise that will help take us to the next step in our ambitious journey to become a global soccer brand. One of the things you guys have already done with that, which I absolutely loved, is putting out an ad for the Super Bowl. We have the World Cup coming up. You already talked about possibly playing against Liga MX teams. What are some of the other things that you and the club are looking at to ultimately grow the brand outside of St. Louis? Because obviously you've been killing it here as well. The MLS across the U.S. has seen it. What about a global brand and perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for sure is an amazing long-term goal and ambition. I would say that we are obviously still very new in this league, and we know that we can only have global relevance if we are successful locally first and foremost. So I would say 95% of our work right now is on super serving our hyper-local audience. Yep. That is not our only goal long term, but it is our strong focus now. We obviously do things like have US men's and women's games here. Why? Because that helps put more sort of global attention on St. Louis and the connection with soccer. We have loved to have Bayer Leverkusen as our first game. We're looking into some other international clubs that we could play against. International players help bring more recognition to the club. Obviously, international competitions like Leagues Cup last year or Champions Cup get us in front of audiences globally. Apple has global distribution, so there are a lot of other pieces of the puzzle where we are looking at how do we try to pick up on some opportunities internationally. I remember actually, last year and the year before when Blom was playing here, we had huge audiences in South Africa. Yeah. A lot of that was, because of Blom. So there are definitely opportunities we see like that where we will try to dial up and see what we can capture. But we are super focused right now on making sure that St. Louis and this region falls in love with this team, comes to Energizer Park and makes it their own.
And you touched, Diego, on the focus being really hypersensitive or hyper aware of what local fans think about and creating this St. Louis brand, super strong, super connected with fans. What role do you see fans playing in achieving that vision that you're talking about? And I feel as a fan, I feel heard. I feel like we do a lot of things. We are very innovative in our approach, and we listen and we adapt. Talk to us a little bit about the fan perspective and how you kind of channel that and make that a feature into what you're doing with the club.
Yeah, fans, every time I'm asked to highlight some things that make this club unique, having worked in so many different clubs and seen so many other clubs, for sure, I would talk about our fans and our experience in the stadium. The fact that it's full every game and that supporter section is loud and they are colorful and they come up with tifos and the amount of time that they dedicate to the club, having full-time jobs, not getting paid by the club is amazing, and we're super fortunate and we love working with them to make that experience so unique and so fun. I think the way in which fans can continue helping us to grow is by being great advocates for the club. We still have a lot of room to grow in this city and in this region. We have, fortunately, we have this great sports institution not very far from here, the Cardinals, who are one of the most successful teams in the history of baseball and have become a little bit synonymous with the city of St. Louis. Yep. Obviously, St. Louis Blues also very successful in 2019 Stanley Cup, and also a great sports team that we have great relationships with. But they are years ahead of us, and we know that there's room for us to grow here. So the more that our fans can tell everyone about the club, the experience, especially those that aren't soccer fans already. I think we've done a great job at all of the people that were soccer fans, presumably like you guys before we arrived. They were all kind of, chomping at the bit, as they say in England, just ready to pounce on a MLS team once it came here. But what I love is meeting so many people that come to the stadium and they say, I'd actually never watched a soccer match in my life. I came to Energizer Park, or last year City Park, and I'm hooked. Right. I want to come back every single game. And the more that our fans can find those sorts of fans that don't know much about the sport and just get them to come, because it's part about the sport, but part about the civic pride, part about the experience, and hopefully we will get more fans to fall in love with the sport through those things. Yeah.
I think that's a perfect point, that it's not only soccer fans. We have plenty of our friends that are not into soccer, but letting them know just going to City Park and doing the experience that Matt Seebeck and team put on is just absolutely incredible. The light show that you guys continually do, the smoke, the flames, the food, the local food is insane. I feel like whenever I go there, I walk out and I need a wheelchair because I ate so much. But I do want to also then kind of pivot in a little bit into your leadership within the club, and kind of also maybe something that Jake mentioned earlier on your consulting background. How do you use that in kind of when you're working on your day-to-day, and then also your futuristic outlook of the club as well?
I think consulting helped me a lot in my previous role and continues helping me more around, first of all, like the toolkit that it teaches you in a kind of like a military training way. Yeah. It is hardcore work in consulting. Very tight deadlines, very challenging goals, very clear ultimate goal and deliverable, a team environment where everyone needs to find a way to work together and maximize the potential from everyone. And that just kind of trains you well to be comfortable managing very different problems, being able to put them down, look at them, structure them, think about them, analyze a little bit. Yeah. Obviously now, once you go into a operating role, as I did in Man City or here, the amount of time that you can dedicate to analyzing is a tiny fraction of what you do in consulting. In consulting, you can spend months figuring out the answer to one really critical $100 million question. You don't have that luxury of time here. You're spinning plates constantly on some urgent things and other important things that just don't require that level of depth of analysis. But at least being comfortable to be able to think through things quickly and then combine that with the intuition that one acquires after having worked in this space now for 12 years allows me to quickly be able to get a sense for decisions and what those should be. So yeah, I think consulting is a great initial job out of college. I never would have thought, after doing it for a couple of years, I'd ended up doing it for 12 years. But it's a great school and it teaches you a lot.
It's a great foundation. No, I would agree. I mean, I'm not in the Diego role. Maybe 10 years down the road. We'll see. Maybe at some point.
It trains you well.
It does. I want to ask you. So Diego, we talked about sort of how you've taken that consulting skill set, applied it here. Talk about your leadership style. Everyone's different, right? That some people are the lead from the front, the lead by example. Some people are a little more quiet and reserved. They surround themselves with great people. How would you describe yourself?
I would say I think that concept of leading by example is really important to me. I've found some great role models along the way in my career, and I loved being able to take cues from them, not only based on what they say, but especially based on what they do and how they behave. So at least that's what I try to do at home with my kids, and what I try to do in my day-to-day, both in this role and in my job as an analyst, really, in consulting, 20 plus years ago. Yeah. I do also believe strongly, especially in the role of working in a sports team, in that we all have to be able to have a lot of fun in our job. We are super lucky to be able to work in a sports organization, especially those that are also from St. Louis and love soccer. Like, even more amazing to be able to be a part of something like this if it checks all those boxes. So I love working hard, but I love feeling happy in what I do, and also knowing that in the team we are there to help each other. I don't like taking decisions for everyone. I like people being responsible for their own departments, coming with recommendations and ideas, supporting them, of course, asking them and challenging them also, but supporting them and making them know that they are trusted with their expertise in the same way that I mentioned sporting. That applies to all the different department heads that work here at the club, and making it feel like that you create that tight-knit group of individuals that you work with that know they are all on a mission here where they have to put the club ahead of everything else, but that they are there to help each other when needed.
I love that, because you mentioned not only kind of working as a team outside of the team, but what everybody that you have here working with you and under you, making them feel almost like equals and kind of working towards the same goal. And I think that's extremely important. And then obviously that's not going to be perfect every time, so you're going to face some challenges. And with all the experiences that you've had throughout the years, 12 plus years in sporting, the sporting aspect of it, what are some of the bigger challenges that you've faced, either in the roles that you've had previously and or here now at City, that you have had to overcome?
I mean, past challenges, I think, I always come back to a couple of really big disruptive moments in the last, say, 5-6 years, which were club relegations. I have thankfully been in about 2 or 3 times more promotions than relegations, but I have suffered some relegations. Yeah. Those are extremely challenging moments. But also COVID. COVID was a really challenging moment, and it affected all teams. And when you're working across the world, everyone was disrupted by that. Both of those were really big crisis moments that impact financials, and by impacting financials, then also impact difficult decisions around people, around players, around projects. And I was so fortunate to be able to live through those really difficult moments with long-term thinking ahead of short-term financial pressures, kind of trust from ownership and from management to make the right decisions for that medium to long term versus just in the short term, prioritizing people above all else. Those things really show the character in the people that you're working with a lot. In those relegation moments, I mean, I've seen, old men crying in moments like that. Colleagues for whom that means a lot, and to be able to get the group together the following day and say, this is chapter closed, and now we have to look to the future and believe that we can do it again. The biggest example of those turnarounds was Girona. I lived through relegations with Girona. Last year, Girona finished third in the league and were first in some moments of the year. They played Champions League football this year at Anfield. They have grown an incredible amount, and a lot of those people are the same people that were there at that time. So I know that they value what they learned from resilience and proof that if you do work hard and you believe and you make the right decision for the long term, the results then follow.
And something I feel like that really gets pushed or challenged in these challenging times is culture, right, Diego? And I wanted to just pick your brain on, talk about City's DNA. What are the core values and the things that really make this club what it is? But this is our last, city-oriented question before I get into some fun questions with you. But can you, Diego, just in a couple of words or just a couple of pillars or values, whatever you want to hit on, that really to you describe the DNA of the club here?
Yeah, I think one thing that comes to mind very quickly is, we call it optimistic or supportive. This is the club is owned by a family. The family has some very strong family values. And those family values extend to how we run this business. We want to be family-like in how we treat others, treat our staff, but also treat our fans. So very supportive culture for sure. Very ambitious, as you can see from the standard of the stadium and the goals for this club being beyond just winning trophies and selling out tickets, which is hard enough, but rather about transforming a city. That shows a level of ambition. Very progressive and innovative. You guys have mentioned several of the things today, like the food story, which is super unique. Also City 2 and that family-oriented experience. The integration of technology that we have in the stadium is also amazing. The app and that sense of when people hear that something hasn't been done before, that gets people going here. It's like, all right, then I think I want to do that. I want to do that, and ownership is very supportive of that. It definitely does build kind of excitement and motivation amongst the staff when we're able to say, wow, we were the first to try that, and that worked pretty well. So I think those would be some really important pillars of the culture here.
Absolutely. I think we've covered everything from a city aspect. Wanted to get to you with a couple personal questions. There's one that came up to my mind as we were working through this. You mentioned Man City quite a bit. Yeah. I'm assuming it's a club that you love and still follow. For sure. I would say now knowing Pete Wood and him loving Arsenal, do you guys ever have any bets on these games? Like if the loser has to show up into the office the next day in a full kit of the other's team, or?
We don't bet. Maybe Pete has known until this year.
Say it, yeah, Pete.
Not Pete. Don't make bets on Man City and Arsenal usually. This year they've had a great year, and I would say that last year there weren't a lot of messages from Pete after the Man City Arsenal games, or even at the end of the seasons. But this year, of course, after Arsenal beat Man City pretty comfortably in that last game, surprise, surprise, a message from Pete arrives the following day.
We're taking him down a bit by the release of the new kit and the 5 stripes, reminding him of the loss of England way back when. So it's kind of, he already told me, or I listened to the City Voices, and he's like, this is the one year they get to talk about it, and then we're never going to talk about it again. I'm like, no, I think this is going to be ringing in your head. You're going to see it daily. Yeah,
it's tough for him this year. For 1 year where they're finally way outperforming Man City, then Liverpool goes on and has this amazing year. It looks like they may not quite make it.
Tough year. But
any Arsenal fans here?
He is as well. But we're going to get off that topic, move on. But Diego, you're now one of our own. You're in St. Louis. Obviously, we love our own. We love St. Louis. Everyone, I feel like, lives and breathes St. Louis, or they boomerang back around to St. Louis at some point. What are some of your favorite things to do around town?
I'd say my life is very strongly anchored around 2 big things. My work, which I also love passionately, and my kids and my family. So that is for sure 95% of my time. I also have young kids, so on the weekends it is a lot of soccer games, thankfully. They do love playing. So they play soccer all year round, and then they pick up whatever sport is in season. And that, I would say, is 90% of my time. The other things that I like to do, I play the piano, and I play a little bit of guitar. So for a little bit of personal therapy, every once in a while I play that at home. And I also love to play paddle, which here is called padel, which is a racket-based sport. It's not paddle, I think it's called paddle racket or paddle tennis here. It's
pickleball?
No.
It's not pickleball
No,
either.
it's indoors with walls.
Racquetball.
No.
Also not.
It's similar.
I'm telling you.
I got to look this up.
I was over in Amsterdam last year. It's a fun game. It's like a little bit of a deader ball, but then there's walls around it.
No, actually no. The deader ball is the paddle sport that you're talking about.
Oh, see, I'm way off.
It's not even that one.
Oh, all right.
They call it padel here. It's with a tennis ball.
Oh, okay.
And you play 2-on-2 indoor with walls around you. It doesn't have to be indoor actually, but in most places so you can play it year round. And they just opened the first padel and pickle club here in St. Louis. It's a sport that was very popular in Spain many, many years back. I've always loved playing. It's never been popular really outside of Spain. So all those years I lived outside, I was never playing. But now that they have one here, about once a week I like to play there.
Nice.
I love that. So after a long workout of playing padel, what are some of the food spots that you like to hit now that you've been in St. Louis? And I'll cross them all off the list. I know you're going to list the ones that are inside the stadium. That's number one. Absolutely, because you can't beat some of the food that we have inside there. But some of the go-to restaurants or to-go food that you've kind of like to enjoy in St. Louis now.
Yeah, I won't go through the ones there, but I do love the ones both
There's a lot
in
of
the
good
stadium
places in there.
and the brick and mortar ones that they have around city. I've loved going to a lot of those. Other ones that I have been to many times and I really, really like. I've got two family favorites to take the kids to. Simple, close to our home. Kids love the food, which are Taco Buddha.
Oh, yep.
Manchester. We go there all the time.
Amazing.
And then I'm trying to remember the name of the other one. It'll come to me.
We'll get it back.
But it's a few blocks from
Buddha
there.
is amazing.
Yeah. Taco Buddha's great.
I've lived next to both their locations in my life, and they're phenomenal. Breakfast tacos. Recommend if you haven't had those yet. They're incredible.
I have not.
I'll add it to your list. Next time. Add it to your list.
And then every once in a while, when we got a date with my wife, which we'll be able to do, I've loved Esca and Indo. I like those two a lot.
I love it.
Okay, you're in the right neighborhood.
He already knows.
That's great.
That's
great. Diego, we know you don't get really much of an off season, right? I mean, there's the off season for the team. You guys don't really take that same thing that seriously. But are there any dream trips coming up? Anything you have your eyes set on? I want to take me and my wife and the kids there soon. Is there anything that's on your mind? We got to do this as soon as we can.
Not really. No. I think right now, all of our time off, we focus on going back home. Okay. So the kids spend time with family and immersed in Spanish, which is important for us to so that they don't lose it. So no other big trip, unfortunately. I think once they maybe get into 10 or 12-year-olds where we have a little bit of opportunity to leave them with someone, then maybe we'll get back to that sort of plan.
We have some recommendations for you, Diego, and that's we heard you like Coldplay off of another City Voices podcast. I did some due diligence on our schedule, and I don't have your schedule, but I can anticipate they're going to, maybe you can stop in Denver on the way home from the Portland trip. That's on June 10th, 7/22, July 22 in Nashville. You could stop in Miami after our last game before the Leagues Cup Phase 1, which we have the break in. And they're playing 10 shows at Wembley in August through September as well. So I don't know if you could squeeze in a trip there.
I would love to. I've been to 2 of their live shows. Okay. Have you guys been to any of their
I've been
concerts?
to 2 shows as well. Yeah.
Chris Martin is an incredible
Unbelievable
performer and entertainer. Incredible. Just connects. It feels like you know him. And there's 60, 70,000 people in the fans. And it was cool to see those Coldplay-like bracelets over here at the park last weekend, which was a bit of a flashback. But yeah, I'd love to make it out to one of those. As you mentioned those, I would love to go to the Sphere one day. I have not been to the Sphere. Love to check that out.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Coldplay at the Sphere would be otherworldly. But Diego, last question we have, just closing message. Any message for the fans? Obviously, we have some listeners that just love to hear people like you speak about the club and about your role and about the impact you're making, both in the club and in the community. Do you have any kind of closing message or kind of what to look for fans in season 3 and beyond?
Yeah, I always keep on saying thanks to fans for what they do for the club. They really are the lifeblood of any sports team, but just seeing how much they love the club, how quickly they have embraced it as their own, and they do an amazing job at getting Energizer Park to feel super unique. We are so grateful. Everyone from ownership to the last person standing here are so grateful for what they do for the team. So just keep on coming, keep on bringing friends. For sure, support us in Open Cup. I would even say there's a lot of people that I run into that are like, yeah, I'd love to go to St. Louis City, but there are never tickets. Right. To all those people that say that, you can go online right now and you can get tickets. Yeah. So don't miss out on the opportunity just because you think it's hard to get tickets. There are tickets available now. We'd love to get as many people as possible in the city to have had the experience of coming to our stadium.
Yeah, if anybody's saying that, tell them to reach out to us. We also have a friend, Lexi Rogers, in sales. Plenty of people, Mark's over here as well. We will definitely hook them up with tickets.
Perfect, do it.
You got your homework, City fans. Diego, thanks for joining the show. It's been a fantastic interview, and thank you so much for what you're doing for the club as well.
Jake, Justin, very nice to meet you both. I did want to let you know that after I accepted the role to come here, there were many days where I would listen to your podcast after the game to get a perspective of what are fans saying after each game.
There we go.
Sorry.
Congrats.
Yeah, if you did that in the first season, we were probably stuttering, or at least I was stuttering my way through it. So you should try listening now. It's a little bit smoother, but it's good to know you listen. We
Thanks
appreciate
for supporting and for continuing to spread the word.
Of course.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Diego.
Thanks.